Okay, so thanks everyone for attending tonight. We've got 17 online. We've got 4 PowerPoint presentations. What I did this afternoon was I imported them all into one big PowerPoint file so that I'm not having to stop the share and reshare, then stop the share and reshare. So I've only got the one file. The first speaker is Bob.
So this is just to give you an overview quickly of Bankstown. As you can see, it's fairly complex looking. 3 runways, 1129. The basic system was we did circuits off the eastern side, which was 29 left or 11 right. Runway centre was for overflow or departures, and the other runway was for normal landings whenever we could. It was a bit safer to do it that way if we could. So departures off, say, 29 centre, circuits off 29 left, and arrivals and departures off 29 right. And 2 circuits running together. Both left was a left circuit and runway right was a right circuit. Overfly generally at 1,000, 1,500 and let down and join the circuit. The star is the control tower. And as you can see, 11 right is pretty easy to see. And the parallel taxiway where the B is where this incident occurred. The orange or brown area is the run-up bays for it. This occurrence was on Saturday afternoon, late afternoon, sun setting behind the control tower and shining right in the eyes, or would have been shining right in the eyes of any departures that were going off 29. But we were operating 11 that afternoon. Traffic had dropped right off. I can't remember the time exactly. It was getting late. And this was the 14th of May, 1988. So we had a Cessna 150 sitting in the run-up bays. They'd done a circuit or 2. The instructor thought this guy was ready for first solo. Gave him a briefing down there. And in the meantime, a Cherokee with a female on her very last solo navigation test was landing while this was going on, landing on 11 right because she was going down to Clarke and Hennessy, which was just to the right of where the control tower position is now. Mm. And she was coming down the taxiway B from right up the other end. And she had a good clip up. She was happy. She'd completed the final test, and she was belting along down that taxiway with the sun straight in her eyes. Couldn't see a damn thing. Mm. And the instructor got out of the Cessna and said to the youngster, "Off you go." And he did. He hit the throttle and zoomed straight out of that run-up bay and straight into that taxiway, because that led him. He was just entering that taxiway as the Cherokee came down there. She didn't see him till the last minute, the last few seconds. Slammed on the brakes and skidded. There were skid marks there, straight into the side of the Cessna. And there's the consequences.
Chomp, chomp, chomp.
Very, very lucky pair of people. The propeller of the Cherokee, as you can see, chewed the tail practically completely off the Cessna. Cessna came from Rex, the Cherokee from Clarke and Hennessy, as I mentioned. And so that the pilot, sitting in the left seat where the door open is there now, he was untouched. The Cessna's propeller chewed through the leading edge of the Cherokee and missed the fuel tank. So it was an extremely lucky exercise. As you can see it a little bit better there. Huddle Charlie Echo was the Cessna, and Echo Mike Zulu was the Cherokee. Now that gives you an idea of just exactly how late in the day this was. I was sitting on the ground position, idly just staring into that basic area because there was so little happening going on, and saw the whole thing occur right from the time she appeared to the time they collided. He just shot out of that run-up bay in such a hurry that nobody had a chance. But nobody died. Nobody was even injured. It was sort of a fairly unhappy ending for the poor girl who was coming to the end of her training time and being sent out on a license very shortly. And I honestly can't tell you what the outcome was because, well, that was outside of air traffic control's interest. And I'm assuming that the pilot from the Cessna eventually got another go at being a solo pilot, and the runway taxiway lights are on. So it was the end of the day. The only other addition to that was that it was quite humorous at one stage. The little Cessna was seen taxiing around with no tail at all. It was just the forward end. reminding me somewhat of what particularly in the First World War, where they used to give students taxiing practice in aeroplanes that couldn't get airborne any longer. I actually suggested to Rex that they might just clean it up a bit and put it online for that exact reason, but I think they rebuilt it, and it was to fly again. And so that's what happens sometimes at Bankstown. 1 minute you're just sitting there quietly staring into the sunset, staring into the light, the low light there, and next minute all hell breaks loose. And that's my little story.
Any questions?
Did your fire trucks come running out?
Yeah, emergency services.
That's the local fire brigade. We still had the RFF in those days.
Oh.
Subsequently, they decided that having the RFF there was unnecessary.
Yeah.
It was unnecessary because they weren't used that often, and that next time, we would just have to rely on the ordinary fire brigade, which of course would take 10 or 15 minutes to get there.
Right.
So if it was something was on fire, you could cook your sausages while you were waiting. But there was a big outcry from the people from all the flying schools, and Air Services, as I think we were at that stage, said, well, okay, the alternative is you pay for it. And funnily enough, the complaints went away, and so did the VRF. And I don't think we had a major accident in what time I was left on the airfield after that, where we would have needed somebody there to save their lives.
Bob, he was asking if there had been any other fatalities before or after your time.
We had many fatalities in my time.
Wow.
We had a Cessna 210 with 6 on board do a very poor takeoff and went into the golf course. He started a right turn, and the wing stalled, and it flick rolled and dived vertically into the ground and exploded on the way down because it hit a tree on the way as it went down. We had a guy who had built himself something like a very easy, but a home built anyway. He got airborne and it inverted it and crashed it into the runway. We had a Cessna 320 that did a departure with 2 POB, lost an engine, did a return and crashed again on the golf course. crashed into one of those little picnic things and exploded and burnt, and both were killed. We had a Cherokee 6 take off. It was an aircraft that I really, really hated. It used to live at Clambake and Hennessy, and they were just at the base of the control tower. And I looked at that one day and said to everybody, you know, that's an aeroplane, that's an accident waiting to happen. And a few months later, that's exactly what did happen. It took off, had a partial engine failure. He did a turn, went through the roof of a factory and exploded. Everybody killed. Again, burned. Any number of other accidents, like undercarriages that wouldn't come down or partially come down, that was survivable. Guy in the circuit did had a partial engine failure, did a circuit to come back, but was so wound up about it all, he forgot to take off what power he did have until he was 3/4 of the way down the runway. And he landed hard, lost control, did a hard right turn, bouncing all the time, bounced over the boundary fence and crashed next to the windsock. He walked away from that one. The fire service nearly didn't walk away from that one, though. They were roaring down the taxiway and turned there, and we had a crash gate, and the crash gate had they were locked, but they had a frangible link in it, and the safety officer was attempting to unlock the gate for the fireys at the time, and they yelled on the radio, "Don't worry about it, man, we'll go through." And I slammed it into the gate. The gate flew open, bounced back, hooked on their bumper bar, and it was like undoing a zipper. All the posts in the length of the fence went until eventually there was so much fence and so much friction and etc. that the fire truck finally just came to a halt. We had a couple of mid-airs. I remember the then SATC came up the stairs one day, and as he looked out the window, he saw an engine falling out of the sky. And he said, "What was that?" And that was the engine out of a Dove, which had collided with, I think it was a Comanche, a twin Comanche, just on mid-downwind. One of the aircraft had gone rather long, and so we thought it had already departed the control zone. And naughtily enough, he'd been told to call, he was climbing into controlled airspace, he'd been told to call Sydney departures while he was still in the circuit area. And the Dove did a tighter turn and they collided. Everybody was killed in that one as well. There was another one where he was in the left circuit for runway 29, and when he turned base, every time he tried to turn final for the runway, he overshot, went through final. He did it 3 times until he finally clipped another aircraft on final, and he went down into a factory, and we were so busy at the time that we hadn't even seen it happen. The Cessna he hit told us that he thought he'd had a mid-air after he landed, and just then the Polair was there, and he said, "I can see a fire." So he went and had a look, and he said, "It's an aeroplane." So that was one that happened that we didn't even see happen. There's numerous other incidents that I can't think of at the present moment, but I assure you there was a lot of death and there were a lot of accidents at Bankstown in those days. That's over a period of 20 years.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Might move on. Righto, so my talk's on the AFHRA Air Force Index. I found this service, I don't know, well, I sort of knew about it some time ago, but back in those days, you had to order microfilm reels and they'd post them to you and you had to pay for them, and it was fairly expensive, and you needed a microfilm viewer to be able to look at all the files that they sent you. But in the last 6 months or so, I discovered that it's now gone digital and it's free. So this is an American thing. I don't know what Air Force base it's at. Could be Maxwell, I'm not sure. But it's very easy to find. If you just do a Google and just type in Air Force Index, you will actually find this website, which is that web address there. And if I just move to the next slide, that's what the page will look like when you click on that link on that previous slide. So it's called Air Force History Index.org. And I've typed in there a typical search. So, as you know, my interest is World War II in Australia, and this is an American site. So it'll be, if you want to find war diaries, if you like, on American units that were based here in Australia during World War II, this is the site to go to. So I've just typed in the 475th Fighter Group, and just a little tip, don't put in the TH, just put the number, like, so it was the 3rd bomb group, you just put 3 bomb group, and you've got a much better chance of finding all the files. So I put in a search there for this 475th Fighter Group, and this is what came back to me. So there was 122 records that it's found, okay, using that as the search criteria. Now you'll see all sorts of information here, but you'll see over here on the left some numbers with a URL link and a like a PDF symbol there. If you click on that, that's what you'll get. So that's what that becomes for this result here. And you notice they've spelt angels incorrectly. They called it angles. What I've highlighted now is the sort of information that you need to fill in on the form. So each month you're allowed 10, a request to get 10 files. I'll go to the form. So here's the form, and there's 10 entries that you can put in here. You can't put another order in until your previous one has been supplied. And what you get is an email from them with a password and a link to download some very large files. And I'll show you how large shortly. So on this form, you just fill all this info out. You need the real number, and I'll go back to the previous slide shortly. Real number, IRIS reference, IRIS number, IRIS numbers, and then a description, if you like. And then you fill that in, save it, because it's one of those, you can enter the data into the form online or on your computer, and then you just mail it off to this address here, afhra.news@us.af.mil. So I'll just go back to the previous slide. So this is the info you need. There was an IRIS num, there was an IRIS reference. In this case, there's none. You need this title, and then you need the real number. And you fill out all you can put in as many as you like, but only a maximum of 10. Sometimes in a couple of days, sometimes it might take a week or a little bit longer. You'll get an email, as I said, with a password and a link to download if you put in for 10, all of the 10 files. Now, this is the first page of just one of those files. So this is a combat history for the 475th Fighter Group, 1943 to 1945, a 302 megabyte file, which I got for free. And there's page 2. Some of them are a little bit hard to read. This one, you can read it, and you can sort of guess some of the words that are in that grayed out area there. I'd highly recommend it if you're interested in historical research, and particularly war diaries of American units. They also cover not just the aviation squadrons, bomber, fighter, and whatever, transport, but also a lot of the ground support units, the air depots and the air service groups and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's the end of my talk. Anyone got any questions?
No, I was just going to say I've got a heap of those reels on my computer, just the same way as the RAAF and the RAF did it. They created a card for every single aeroplane that was ever on, for every serial number of every aeroplane. And it's some of its history, which is only good as far as it was in the US itself. After it left the US, there'd be nothing on the card except usually the final fate.
Yeah.
Or if it returned to the US, there'd be a string of, and trying to understand, it takes a long, long time to be able to translate what the codes and things mean that they've got all over those cards.
Yeah.
I've got all bar one reel of the 19,265 liberators that were ever.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And I have all the RAF cards.
Yeah. Yeah, these are good, these files, because you can get all the combat stuff as well, all the sorties that they did. Lots of good information.
Great.
And
So how did you go for images and photographs and movies, videos?
both, some of the reports do have photos. They're very poor quality.
Okay.
Yeah, they're very poor quality. Haven't seen videos, but yeah, a number of the reports do have photos, but yeah, they're not good enough to use. I haven't used any of them on my website at all. So over to you, Gordon.
Thank you very much. Okay, what I want to do tonight is take you back 107 years from last December to an airfield near a town in France called Baylieu, which is just near the border of Belgium. It was the home of 69 Squadron AFC, and I'm hoping that there at least someone here tonight hasn't heard this story before. Okay, on the 17th of December 1917, around about 4 in the afternoon, 1600 hours, Jones and Hodgkins take off in their RE-8 aircraft, and at the same time, Lieutenant James Sandy and Henry Hughes board their aircraft, and they take off about 15 minutes later. Now, James Sandy, he was born in Ashfield in Sydney in February 1886. So he wasn't a young man when he joined up. He joined up in the first month of the war, August 1914. He was a little over 28 and a half. He was wounded at Gallipoli in late June 1915. And while convalescing back in England, he reassessed his, involvement in the war, and he decided to learn to fly. And he enrolled in the Hendon Flying School and obtained his Royal Error Certificate. The AIF in England was having none of that. They returned him to Australia, demobbed him, and he said, I'm going to get back in. He joined the AFC, and they put him in a squadron that was just forming adjacent to Point Cook. There's a tent city adjacent to Point Cook in late 1916, and he becomes one of the original members of the squadron. Later on, when they fly across to France in September 1917, he's actually the deputy leader of A Flight. Now to Henry Hughes, he's another one original of the squadron. He was born in Melbourne in 1890, so 4 years younger. He enlists in the AIF, and because of his mechanical background, he's put into this squadron forming at Point Cook. and his rank as a second-class air mechanic. He's not a young man when he joins up here. He's nearly 26 and a half. In the middle of 1917, it becomes that they're told eventually that they're going to become a core squadron, which means that they're going to be flying an aircraft that is essentially a two-seater pilot with an observer in the back. And when they were forming in Australia, they had no idea what they were going to be flying, so they had no observers. So they put a call around for 7 observer positions within the squadron, and out of 100 volunteers, they filled the positions, of course. One of them was Henry Hughes. Now, he then has to go on a course, and he gets posted back to 69 Squadron on the 10th of December 1917. So it's a week exactly before this flight that he goes up with James Sandy. I believe this is his first flight up in the RE8 on an operational mission. Okay, and also I should mention too that 69 Squadron, that they were the first Australian AFC squadron to go on the Western Front. And in November, just a month before this event, they started working with the 9th Corps, an Australian unit, and it was the first time that the Australian infantry were working with an Australian Corps squadron. On that particular day, I've just listed there the ages of James Sandy and Henry Hughes. So James is almost 32 and Henry is almost 28. The reason I list them is we have this concept of, or this idea that most of the people that fought in the air over the front were 18 and 19-year-old kids. But that's, from my research into this particular squadron, that's certainly not the case. The average age was about 25, and they had at least 4 aircrew over the age of 30, one of whom, of course, is James Sandy. Another one people will remember is the first Australian to fly an Australian-built aircraft in Australia, John Dugan. And it puts a whole different perspective on the age groups. I mean, they're still young. They're very young compared to us now. But it does put a different perspective on the age groups of the aircrew. Okay, so the addresses on this particular day, on the 17th of December, was the RE8. You'll see there on the left-hand side, and the top right is the RE8. The picture on the left is a good example to show the armament of the aircraft. You'll see just down from the pilot's elbow is the Vickers machine gun on the side of the fuselage there on a mounting bracket. And it was just at the right height he could reach down and try and clear some jams from the engine, from the gun. And that was obviously synchronised through the propeller. In the back was a Lewis machine gun on a Scarif wing. It is not loaded at the moment, but they had an ammunition drum to put on there. Now, in a combat, when Hughes was run out of ammunition, what he has to do, you have to reach up, lift up a handle, turn it through 90 degrees, pull the drum off, and I guess chuck it away, probably chuck it at the albatrosses or other German aircraft coming by. Then you have to reach down, pick up another drum, put it on the spindle, lock it into place, turn the handle again through 90 degrees, and then commence firing. So you would hope that they're pretty good at doing this sort of thing under pressure, because there's a lot riding on it, your life and your pilot's life in front. Now, the core plane, the RE8, had a top speed of 102 mile an hour without any bombs and just pilot and ammunition on board. And that's important for when we talk about the albatross. The other thing was that the plane was a very stable plane, core plane. They had to be, because the pilot was overloaded. He had to fly the plane. He had to. He had a Morse key inside on the right-hand side of the cockpit. He had to tap away on that to give the instructions to the artillery that were hitting the German artillery. And if there's a gun jam, he had to reach out and clear the gun jam. He had to he had a map on it somewhere on his knees or something like that he had to reference to give references to the artillery when they're firing at the German artillery and so on. So he was quite overloaded. So you want your plane to be stable, and the RE8 was. The other aircraft in the combat was this Albatross D5A. It had double the number of machine guns firing forward. It had two. And it had a top speed of 116 miles an hour. That's one of the ones, the D5A down in the bottom right-hand corner, obviously with the pilot and some of the ground crew. It was not only was fast, it was highly manoeuvrable and was a formidable opponent. Now, on this particular day, Sandy and Hughes are supporting a siege battery, and they've been doing it for about 35 minutes. What they're doing is they fly over the line, check out where the German battery is, they fly back, Sandy's flying and tapping away on his Morse key to give the instructions. Oh, I forgot to mention the radio that's inside the RE8 is just a transmitter. There's no receiver. So he flies back to where the Allied guns are. They put sheets on the ground to show you, to communicate with the plane. And then he flies back again over the gets them to fire, flies back over the front and checks out where their shells are falling and informs that. And he just keeps doing this figure eight backwards and forwards. And he's been doing this for about 35 minutes when Sandy taps him on the shoulder and says, "We're going to get attacked." And there's 6 Albatross scouts come down and attack them. Now, if these 6 Albatross scouts were following normal German procedure, they would leave 2, sometimes 4, as a cover, and 2 or 4 would dive down and start taking pot shots at in this case, the single RE8. To Sandy's, I guess, it surprised me what he got 2 choices, of course. It's fight or flight. He can't run away, but they had other tactics where they could spiral down and get down low and just get away with his gunner firing. But in this case, Sandy turns on the scouts and attacks them by surprise. His gunner, during the combat, managed to hit a fuel tank and wound the pilots of one of the Albatrosses, and they drop out of the fight. While this is going on, the crew that I mentioned before, Jones and Hodgkins, who took off 15 minutes before our crew, they see the fight and they come over to join in. Also, to join in the fray is another pilot or another aircrew group, Wrigley and Blair. If the name Wrigley rings a bell, that's John Wrigley. He was instrumental in, he joined the RAF in 1921 and was a figure in the Second World War in England and rose to the rank. I think it was he was Air Commodore or Air Vice Marshal. And he's in one of the other scouts. And eventually what this happens is the Albatrosses withdraw from the fight. Okay, so Jones and Hodgkin, they wave to Sandy and Hughes and they head off back to base. The 3rd RE8, Wrigley and Blair, they head off across the front. Off they all go. That night, the only crew not to land is Sandy and Hughes. They ring around airfields, hospitals nearby and that, but they get nothing. 24 hours later, they get a telegram, as you can see there, from the hospital, and it's saying that they have the bodies of Sandy and Hughes. When Jones and Hodgkins waved goodbye and Blair and Wrigley and Blair headed across the front, Sandy and Hughes were already dead. There was a single bullet that pierced Hughes's lungs as he's standing up firing. He slumped down in the back seat and the bullet went through his lungs, out the back and into Sandy's head. The RE8 then flew around in circles, being blown by an easterly wind that put them further and further behind their lines until the petrol ran out. And then their RE8 A38-16 executed pretty good sort of crash landing and preserved the bodies of its aircrew until they were found and moved to a local hospital. As you can see there, Sandy and Hughes were recommended for those particular awards. I think well deserved considering what they did. The other thing too was that Hughes was only a sergeant. He was a sergeant observer. They only had about 4 or 5 in 69 Squadron. And the pilots and the other observers hated the fact that they were sergeant observers because they weren't with their crew. They were off in the sergeant's mess and the sergeant's billet or the NCO billets and stuff. And not long after this, all the sergeant observers were actually promoted. But poor Hughes wasn't, of course, because he's gone. And he happened to be the only sergeant observer killed in action with 69 Squadron. And as the last point mentions there, they were the last casualties of 69 Squadron. Next month, in about late January 1918, they were renamed to 3 Squadron AFC, and of course, that's continued through today, 3 Squadron flying the F-35s. Just before we move on, that cross there on the previous slide, that was Sandy's grave, the original one. As you can see, they fashioned it out of an RE-8 propeller. I don't have one for Hughes's grave, but he was buried away from Sandy because he was an NCO, not an officer. So, go figure. Okay, the Albatross that was brought down, it was serial number 5390/17. It crashed behind the Allied lines. Its pilot was a Lieutenant Klaus of Jasta 29. He, of course, became a prisoner of war, and the Australians claimed that enemy aircraft as war booty. That particular aircraft, now Albatross, now resides in the Australian War Memorial. You'll see the picture on the left there, looking down on the engine. I don't know how well you can see it, just at the back sort of cylinders, exhaust there. You can just see the 2 machine guns. They're either side of that silver object, if you can see the silver object there. And that just gives you a good idea of the inline engine and how the snug fit of it was around the Albatross. The picture in the top right was taken by me in June 1980, and that's the cockpit of that Albatross. You can see there the 2 wooden handles on the control column or joystick, whichever one you want to call it. And you can see the gun firing button there too. I remember, and it never came out too well, even with flash, but a lot of the 3 Squadron people had signed their names or written their names inside on the wood of the Albatross. I don't know if it's still there, but it was there back in 1980. And the flood at the bottom is just an example to show how big the RE-8 was in comparison, in this case, to 2 of the aircrew and I think 2 ground crew members of the squadron. So that's the Ghost Flight. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Any questions, everyone?
Thank you.
Oh, stunned silence.
That was good.
No question, Gordon, but it's a famous incident, isn't it?
Yes.
All I want to do is just briefly update you onto what Tony Arbin and I are doing with the Eddie Coates collection in scanning it into Australian Air data. A little bit of background. Eddie wanted his collection to come back to Australia before he died, and I arranged to go over and pick it up and bring it back in 2019, with the physical matter going to CAHS in Melbourne, and the pardon me, the electronic versions coming with me up to Brisbane. The intent was to put as much as possible into Australian Air data to fill gaps, particularly the older stuff. People mightn't be aware, but Eddie was particularly keen on the GAU series and the VHU series, and in fact had got over 2/3 of photographs of over 2/3 of the total number of material registered in the original GAU and VHU series, which is an amazing achievement. Eddie's photos for his collection have come from all over the world, not just all the people you know, but also a lot of people you've never heard of that either were just visiting Australia or swap with people in Australia. And his collection is rather amazing. The electronic collection amounts to about 150,000 individual entries. So it's taking a long time to actually go through them and reprocess them to make them viable for Australian air data. I'm up to the VHC at the moment, and that's taken 6 months to get that far. So whether I get through the whole lot in my lifetime or not is a matter of conjecture. One of the most interesting things is I did not realise that we had a number of Grumman G21As that came to Australia. These in the very early series, the VHAA, AY and AZ, came through for the Papuan Oil Development Company of Melbourne in January 38. And Eddie managed to find one of AAY, but only PKAKR for the second one, AAZ. And the reason being that AAZ was not actually officially taken up, so it never wore that registration, even though it's shown in the registration document. But to have photos of those two, since they were on Australian soil for such little time, was rather amazing. They were both destroyed by the Japanese during the war in attacks on airfields. Another one of these very interesting, almost, well, this is a one-off, was a Hindustan HT2. Now, it's pretty obvious what it's based on. The Indians built it based on the chipmunk, of course. There was one registered in Australia, but once again, never carried the registration, only ever carried the Indian registration. It stayed for a year and a half odd and then went back to India because nobody really saw it as any value in Australia. To be honest, it didn't appear to be very well built. It certainly had the standard Cirrus Major engine and a stated cruise speed of 110, but I guess that was probably debatable. But it's a one-off, and once again, Eddie managed to secure a photo of it. And in his notes, he talks about, if you look it up in the Eddie Coates site, he talks about where he obtained the photo from. In this case, you'll see it here, Neil Follett. It got it at Moorabbin in 1958. I was also surprised. I've only ever seen one Miles Gemini in my life, and that was the one at Bankstown in the middle photo there, shown in red and missing engines after it had been stripped down. You might remember these were one of the many aircraft that wood bonded glue that were put out to pasture and mostly burnt for practice and things like that. As you go through, and this is only just the early AA stuff, showing 3 different ones here. And again, the sources, you see Eddie, the second one talks about, or the first one talks about Eddie's photo at Bankstown. Now, I should tell you that Eddie started photographing in Australia the year I was born in 1949. And over the years that he was here into the late 60s, early 70s, his cameras and his photos got remarkably better, as was the case with most of it. Again, you'll see some names coming up here, and this comes up. People like Jeff Goodall has supplied many photos to Eddie. Eric Allen's another one that people knew well. I do have a list on a separate sheet here showing just some of the people who have supplied photos to this collection. So you've got people like John Hopton, Roger McDonald, Neil Follett, Mick Madden, Morris Austin, and on it goes, even to more recent people like Phil Varbra. But it's amazing the people that I met at one stage or another, and of course the many hundreds that I've never known or never met that supplied photos over the years to Eddie for this fabulous collection. Another type of porterfield, I knew nothing about the flyabout. I'm very familiar with the other porterfield, but there was a flyabout came out in 1938. It lasted till 1942, and you'll see on the right-hand one there of its demise in Victoria. And then, again, it's amazing that Eddie has more than one photo when it was in good condition and when, of course, it had its accident. This is the strength of the Eddie Coates collection, is that most aircraft he has more than one photo, more than one colour scheme, more than one owner, and quite frequently, as the original slide showed, as many tiger moth crashed photos as you'd like. You get an idea of how many tiger moths joined the civil register after the war just by the number of Eddie Coates's crash shots. Another one is, of course, the Wacket. Again, I didn't realise how many came onto the register until I started this project, and we've all heard about the Wacket. Some of them been converted to yeoman crop masters, and so the fact that he has of the 21 that were built, I think Eddie's got 19 of them photographically, which is pretty amazing. So you'll see there the original one, Neil Follett, got BAW in its original form, and then of course BAQ on the other side is one by Eric Allen at Bankstown. Amazingly, I think there's 3 of the pardon me, of the crop masters that have been converted back to Wackets, which I found another fascinating fact. What I really was important was that this site now is Eddie Coates' site is being run itself in its entirety the way he left it. His intention was to have it continually updated, but nobody really has got the resource to convert it into a form that's usable. So it's in its original form under Eddie Coates or under the CAHS site. Either way, you can access it. It's an amazing resource, and not just Australian. He's got some early New Zealand stuff there, some early American stuff, some early military stuff. As I said, his intention was to capture as much of the pre-1970 stuff that he could, and did an amazing job. So all I wanted to do was just give you a brief update of where I'm up to with the process, and trying to get it finished, because I've got another couple of offers of major collections to bring into this, and I'll advise as they come to hand. It's pretty incredible the offers that are out there from people, and some of you gentlemen on the screen there have supplied me with stuff for these collections, and it's been pretty tremendous. So AAD, you know all about it. Eddie Coates, if you didn't know about his collection, have a look at it. I think you'll be rather surprised. Thanks, Peter.
Okay, I don't think we can ask Ian questions because he can't hear us, as far as I know. Yeah. So, any other general questions before we wrap it up?
Not actually a question, folks. Just to thank you all who put those contributions tonight. Most interesting indeed. Gordon, I'm surprised how you'd put that together, but it's very well done.
Thank you.
Thank you for all of you.
Thank you.
Well, everybody, have a good night. See you on
Friday week.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
No.